Hello, friends, and welcome to another episode of the Timist Podcast Series. My name is James, and I am the Timist and the host of the thing you're currently listening to. In this two-parter episode, I have the pleasure of speaking with Hamza Masood, who is the Business Development Manager for the world's most powerful watch market research platform, WatchCharts. We sit down and we learn more about his background and professional journey that eventually led him to join WatchCharts in the first place, as well as the first watch brand that truly got him hooked, Seiko. We also dive deeper into what makes WatchCharts such a powerful tool, exploring how it got started, how it gathers data, high-level interpretation, and how the end results can benefit us as users, whether we're looking to buy or sell a watch. We also look back and dissect market health, go over trends that we noticed, and touch a bit on the vintage watch world. As mentioned earlier, this is part one of a two-part series. Now, sit back, relax, grab a drink and a snack as we get started. Thank you everyone for joining us. It is my absolute pleasure to introduce our guest today. He's a local Seattleite, but a Princeton University graduate that somehow got bit by the watch bug. Having spent a good portion of his career at Microsoft and later Amazon, he's now the Business Development Manager for the world's most powerful watch market research platform, WatchCharts. I'm thrilled to introduce you all to Hamza. Welcome, my friend. How are you this evening?
That was too kind. I'm doing very well, James. How are you?
I'm fantastic. I mean, I'm sitting here with you. We're about to do a podcast. We're going to talk about some exciting, wonderful topics. I'm great.
Awesome.
Thanks for agreeing, and thanks for being a guest on the show. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Happy to be here.
Now, I don't want to be a traditionalist, but you already know what I'm going to ask you.
What are you going to ask me?
What's on the wrist?
I am wearing my RGM 801 Corps of Engineers. So Roland Murphy is an American watchmaker who's been based out of a small town right outside Lancaster, Pennsylvania. He's been making watches for the last 3+ decades. He makes pretty much as much of the watch as he possibly can in-house. So that means case, hands, crown, strap, buckle, movement plate, movement bridges, screws, wheels. Pretty much the only thing in this watch that wasn't made in America is the hairspring, I believe the escapement assembly, so the pallet fork, and then the jewels. So prior to J.N. Shapiro making the Resurgence, which is the first watch in I don't know how many decades that is 100% made in America, to be eligible for those words to be written on the watch, made in America.
Mm-hmm.
This was as American made as you could get on not too expensive a budget. So Roland Murphy does make watches with Swiss movements, but his in-house movements are slightly higher on the price ladder. But for me, I got this 2 years ago, and I wear it still occasionally. I'll go through bursts where I'm wearing it. So right now it's been on the wrist for a while. Yeah, love this thing. It's very near and dear to my heart. I'm probably going to keep it for as long as I breathe. This one's never leaving the collection, so a very special watch. And yeah, I look down on it, super legible, keeps time excellently. So everything about it, and we can, I mean, spend more time talking about it if that's of interest, but there's just a number of things about it that make it really special to me.
Well, thank you for sharing. I know that it is a special piece in your collection and has a special home in your heart, because I believe it was acquired for a special reason in your life.
Correct. So I naturalized as a U.S. citizen in 2021, and I wanted to get, thank you. And I wanted to see if I could find like an American-made watch to commemorate the occasion. And this was as close as I could get to that back then. And the dial is customized for me to that end. I went to a school for studying electrical engineering. That was my major in college. And this is modeled after railroad pocket watches that were worn by the Army Corps of Engineers in the late 19th century when the railroad network across America was being built out. So just that historical callback and connection as well. To me, as somebody who studied engineering today and does I would say now an engineering light, but previously a solidly engineering heavy job. Yeah. And then of course, like Lancaster, Pennsylvania is not that far from where I first landed in this country. My cell phone area code is still 609, which is Central Jersey. People still ask me about that. Um, so yeah, just everything sort of like put together is like my journey over the last almost 2 decades now in this watch.
I love it. I love it. Thank
Yeah,
you for sharing. Yeah, I knew the story, but I wanted our listeners and our viewers to hear it as well because there's such deep connections to, to the watch that you ordered specifically
yeah,
and visited the shop in person and spoke with the master himself.
yeah.
And
It was very amusing driving to his workshop because you drive through a bunch of farm country
mhm.
and it was sort of like I imagine the American version of the oh my God, like I'm going to visit my Swiss watchmaker up in the valley in the middle of the Swiss countryside somewhere, right?
Uh-huh. Yeah.
This had that feel, except it was a bunch of cornfields. So and the roads were wider, and we were driving on the other side. Actually, I can't. Yeah, I don't know what side of the road they drive on in Switzerland, but yeah, the American version of that experience.
I
And
love
then
it.
Roland is wonderful to talk to, and he's he's very sort of like matter of fact in the way that he talks about how he makes his watches and what they represent and what he can do for you in terms of customization. Um, and their features and other product characteristics. So yeah, just all around wonderful experience.
That's so cool. That's so cool. I'm so happy for you, and I'm so glad that you got to experience that. And maybe, who knows, what the future will hold for the rest of us. We might all pay a little visit into the
Let's do it.
countryside. Let's do
Road
it.
trip time.
I'll hold you to it. I'll hold you to it.
Yeah,
Congrats again. It's a beautiful piece. I've had the good fortune of seeing it in real life, and it is a beauty. What is the diameter on it again?
42 millimeters on the
42.
case,
Yeah.
and the lugs are a little bit long. So um, just this year, I believe he has now launched a 40 millimeter version of this watch. It just like the movement basically essentially fully fills out the case back. With this one, there's still I think there's a spacer inside, and there's you put the case back on, and there's a metal ring,
Hmm.
quite a noticeable metal ring before you get to the display case back. So I have not had a chance to try that one on in person. Roland has been attending Watch Time in New York. So if you do not want to make the drive out to rural Pennsylvania, Watch Time New York is definitely a good time to check out his watches in person.
That's great advice, and I'm sure people are frantically taking notes right now, jotting this down. Thank
Every October, I think.
Let's give our viewers and listeners maybe some additional context about you. Please share with us some of your background and past experience because I mentioned in the intro a little bit. I know you worked in the tech industry for a bit. Is that right?
Yeah. Yeah. So I went to college not really like sort of having like this vague notion that I wanted to be an engineer, and then ultimately deciding that that is what I wanted to do because I like sort of taking things apart, putting them back together, understanding how they work. Just have my entire life had a deep fascination with that, um, which I think lent itself very well to studying engineering. And then out of college, I got hired by Microsoft, where I was a program manager. So I spent a few years working in Bing on basically like web performance. So how do
Okay.
you make the website load faster? How do you make search results available faster? How do you optimize the front end, the back end, both in terms of like technical features as well as just pushing for greater like sort of alignment across the entire organization to say, hey, performance matters. I forget the exact number it was. I think it was something like every 100 milliseconds that you can shave off of page load time um, is enough additional revenue to hire an extra engineer. Or at least this was the math, whatever it was now, 10, 12 years ago.
Hmm.
Um, I'm probably getting the specifics wrong, but basically like speed matters.
Yeah.
So I did that, super technical role. Then I spent 4 years in Azure, working sort of more on the slightly more sort of business oriented role because It was part of the team that does long-term and short-term capacity planning for Azure. So how
Mhm.
many data centers do we build? How many servers do we put in those data centers? How do we buy those servers? How do we build them? How do we maintain them? How do we decommission them? Where does all of the hardware go? Who do we buy it from? And so on and so forth. So, but again, with an eye to delivering capacity when you need it,
Mhm.
because I'm sure you're deeply aware of this. Server capacity is not cheap to build out,
Nope.
and you don't want extra idle capacity sitting around where it's not needed. So yeah, worked on that, and then I think what I found myself sort of struggling with was not necessarily feeling like deeply passionate about what I was working on. I felt like I was competent at it, but the motivation just wasn't there. I left to go spend a year at Amazon and realized the hard way that that was a bad idea because the corporate life didn't seem to agree with me
Hmm.
very much at that point. Went to work at like a smaller, relatively smaller enterprise software startup. And one of the best things that could have happened to me happened there, where my manager was like, just 3 months in, like, your heart's not in this. So you need to go figure out like what it is that you are passionate about. Because if you're passionate about it, I can tell like you seem to have a sensible head on your shoulders. You'll be happy and successful doing whatever it is you do at that point. Decided to give WatchCharts a shot. I had spoken to Charles, who's the CEO, and John, who's employee number two and is one of our software developers, um, about a year earlier at that point. And so I was like, "Hey guys, like, are you looking for somebody else to join the team?" And they were like, "Yeah, you're welcome to join." And came on. I mean, I think at that point, like everybody already knew, like all three of us were watch nuts. They knew that I had the work experience, and so because both of them are engineers, and because I seem to have like more of a skill set or personality, I guess, type suited to fulfilling more of the external facing functions that the company needed. I came on board and I've been doing it now for a little over 3 years and loved every second of it.
I dig it.
Near enough every second of it.
It's not, you're
Yeah.
saying it's not all sunshine and daisies every moment of every day.
No, 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 no. That
Weird.
is that is not what life is like. It
Strange.
doesn't matter whether or not you're working at a job that you're passionate about. But yeah, I feel like it was important to me to find something that I felt like I could be passionate about, even when the daily drudgery got to me.
Hmm.
Um, I do have a very obsessive compulsive personality, and so I can now think about, dream about, obsess over, ruminate about watches and watchmaking and the business of both pretty much all the time. And I don't often have to feel like I'm drawing a boundary between work and life in that sense. I mean, yes, of course, like I keep regular working hours and I have things to do on a daily basis that are sort of like, the responsibilities of the job, but fundamentally why I'm there, what I'm trying to accomplish, why I'm in this industry are no longer questions that keep rearing their heads. When I was in Azure, it was like, why are you here? What are you trying to accomplish, right? And I think for millennials, or generally like people in my demographic, I think like we grew up in like this age of optimism where everybody was like told that we could work on solving like world changing problems and make the world a better place. And I think a lot of how technology has now seen to have impacted society over the last, let's say, 10 to 15 years has shown that maybe that promise was a little overblown. And I think I was just a little sensitive to it, perhaps more than the other people that I worked with over time. So for me, ultimately, I think it was about like finding something that I was happy about,
Hmm.
spending my time on, and sort of devoting my blood, sweat, and tears on, um, and that I could feel passionate about, and that I enjoyed doing. And whatever it was now, 7, 8 years ago, when I first fell in love with watches, it was very obvious like this was going to be something that would stay with me for the rest of my life. And so when it came time to like think about what to do professionally, it was like, all right, well, this would be
Now you can do it while on the clock,
exactly,
right?
exactly, exactly.
I
So
love
I
it.
get to, yeah. So every time I have a business call now with somebody, I get to talk about watches and I get to like geek out about what they have on the wrist for the first 5 minutes, and then we'll talk business. But those 5 minutes, it's pretty nice. I was on a call with someone recently, and they were wearing the new titanium Yachtmaster.
Oh no, don't say that to me. No, don't say. I love
And
I love that watch.
it's just like the same reason that people say that the reason people wear a watch, or the reason I like wearing a watch, is because it can help you strike up pleasant conversations with strangers
Mhm.
at a bar, or just generally break the ice when you're meeting somebody for the first time.
One of the things, right? It's one of the
One of the
things.
things,
Yeah.
absolutely. One of the, I think definitely within a social context, probably, one of the more important things. I maybe took that to the extreme where this guy was sitting like far off in a Zoom call, and I could make out what was on his wrist, and I identified it, and he was like, "How did you what how?" And I was like, "Well, when you think about and look at and
Uh-huh.
obsess over watches every day, then that's kind of what happens." So, yeah, again, it was just color to the conversation.
Hmm.
And I think like on a human level, it helped me connect with this person a little bit more, which means that hopefully now, like, as we talk business or whatever, like that conversation goes a little bit better. But of course, like you said, that's not the only reason that we're interested in watches.
It's not the only reason, but I've noticed that it is sort of like a magical experience once you find quote unquote your person and you recognize that you have a shared interest in a hobby such as watches, how quickly a relationship can sort of speed run past a bunch of different checkpoints that otherwise would have
Yep.
taken longer to achieve. It's like, oh, Hamza's into watches, so am I. Well, we're already off to a great start.
Yeah, yeah. I think exactly. I think you can spend maybe a 15-minute conversation, having a 15-minute conversation with someone about watches, and learn so much about them. There was this documentary that came out of a couple of years ago, I want to say, maybe 3 years ago, but there was a quote near the start of it from Nick Manousos, who's the executive chairman of the Horological Society of New York.
Hmm. Hmm.
I forget the exact wording, but he described watches and watchmaking as a history lesson wrapped inside an engineering lesson, wrapped inside a craftsmanship lesson, wrapped inside an artisanship lesson, wrapped inside. He just like described like how it really is an onion. And I think with just 15 minutes talking to someone about a watch, you'll learn based on what they tell you they like about it, what they have chosen to have that object subsume in terms of
Hmm.
its like meaning to them.
Hmm.
And so it like indirectly tells you what they care about. So if somebody flashes, like a solid gold Rolex at you, and it's like, oh, check this out. I paid like X amount of money for this, right? That tells you something about the person,
Hmm.
in
Hmm.
an entirely value neutral way. I think the
Sure,
judgment comes as a secondary
sure.
part to it.
Yeah.
But the first part is just recognizing that this is how this person thinks about this object. Or maybe they'll say, oh, this is a burner on. And I just like I was so taken with the story that Sylvain tells about how he set up his brand. And maybe that tells you that this person is, really a firm believer in the value of entrepreneurship and bootstrapping oneself, because
Mm-hmm.
that is indeed the story that Sylvain tells about how he went about setting up his brand. Maybe they, like Grand Seiko, and that that tells you something else entirely about the person. And so on and so forth. And I say this as like I have had maybe like two conversations, or like conversations with two people who I have found to be like bigger fans of the brand than I consider myself to be. So I
Mm-hmm.
say that with all love and respect for everything that the Seiko Corporation has achieved and continues to achieve. And I think the ability to have these objects then result in the formation of profoundly important relationships with other people, is probably the least expected outcome that I have found myself sort of dealing with from when I first got into it. I was
Mm-hmm.
not expecting to make friends. I was not expecting to find a community of like-minded individuals. I was not expecting to really feel like I found a space where I could just be myself. in any number of ways.
But here you are. Now you've made a career out of it.
And I'm very happy for it.
And I'm sure a lot of people are very thankful as well because well, we'll get into it a little bit later, but I thank you for sharing all that. And it's beautiful and it's humbling and it's inspirational in many ways. But aside from all of that, and you've touched up on it
Yeah.
just a little bit briefly, just at the tail end of what you just said. I know you as my go-to Grand Seiko sensei. You have a few.
Yes.
I won't pepper too much into it. I will just ask, how did your love for Grand Seiko start?
I think it started with reading about the brand from a bunch of different places, and there were a number of things that I think made it attractive to me as first just a luxury purchase, because I think it has to start with just considering the possibility of spending that much money on an object that intrinsically has no value. Or certainly that's what I believe, and we can talk about that in greater detail if you'd like to get into it. But and then sort of coming full circle back to that question, which is where can you find good value for money watchmaking in the, let's say, mid to high tier, which I would describe as, let's say, $3,000 to $15,000,
Mm-hmm.
where it's not just a luxury purchase in the, let's say, $1,000 to $3,000 range, but you're really sort of like taking an extra step above that. And you're looking for a product that similarly takes a leap in terms of what you're getting for that money. And I think that a lot of what is sort of intrinsic to the craftsmanship of the product, the innovation that it represents, the quality of the finishing, the brand messaging, the fit and finish to some degree, although there's maybe some stuff that we can sort of put a pin in for maybe later
Mm-hmm.
when it comes to bracelets. Um, and honestly, also to some degree, the fact that it is not Swiss.
Mm-hmm.
I think all of those things combine to create a very potent mixture of reasons why Grand Seiko can start to feel, certainly in my experience, irresistible. You can stay with the brand and experience so much of what watchmaking has to offer. If you really wanted to be like a one brand collector for your entire life,
Mm-hmm.
not that I would recommend that for anyone, but if you
Mm-hmm.
did, you could do worse than to pick Grand Seiko. And the reason for that is that I believe their cheapest watches start somewhere in the $2,500 to $3,500 range. What you'll get for that is a decent bracelet, a decent looking case, but amazingly finished, hand polished hour markers on the dial, hands, beautiful dial. It could be something as simple as silver or pure black, but just immaculately finished.
Mm.
And you'll get one of the nicest quartz movements out there in the world.
Homegrown quartz.
Homegrown quartz.
Mm-hmm.
People talk about like doing in-house.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't get more in-house than operating your own quartz crystal manufacturing facilities, which is exactly what
Seriously.
Seiko does,
Yeah.
right? So starting with that, they'll sort of, build all of the circuitry for the quartz movement. They'll build the mechanical components. They will finish the decoration on the movement. They will assemble it themselves. They will regulate it themselves. They will do the installation themselves, the bracelet, the hands, the case, the crown. All of that is done in-house, right? So insofar as buying an in-house product is desirable because it is perceived to be of a higher quality of craftsmanship and dedication to the product, Grand
Given that
Seiko,
you have that whole vertical sort of
yeah,
structure in place and top to bottom.
yeah. And then as you start climbing the price ladder from there, you get into mechanical movements, both hand wound and automatic. Then within automatic, you can even get high bead movements. They're one of the few brands that makes high bead movements. Then if you're not done with, if a lever escapement mechanical conventional movement is not enough for you, you can get one of the new, I believe they're the 9SA movements, which are still high beat, automatic previously, but now also available in a manually wound version. 80 hours of power reserve. and featuring a brand new escapement design that Grand Seiko is the first company to have successfully mass produced since Omega launched the coaxial movement in 1999. Which, when you remember that Grand Seiko has previously launched, or Seiko, the Seiko Corporation.
Hmm.
I'm sort of using those terms loosely and
Yeah.
interchangeably, but
Yeah.
I think for the larger point that I'm trying to make, it's really the Seiko Corporation and not Grand Seiko. They launched quartz. They brought the first quartz watch to the world in 1969. They introduced spring drive in 1999, and then they introduced the dual impulse escapement movements in, I believe, 2020. Right. So
Quite a few
there
feathers in
is
their cap.
there is no other company that can claim to have invented and then successfully produced at industrial scale more than one fundamentally distinct timekeeping innovation.
Within the watch
Nobody
industry. Yeah.
else.
Yeah.
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 Everybody else in the Swiss watch industry, by and large, that is mass producing watches, is doing it with Swiss lever escapement movements, including, of course, like the conventional Grand Seiko movements. But if you want to shell out more for a technically superior product, a technically distinct product, a technically innovative product, Grand Seiko is one of the few places where you can get it without paying like six figures for something exotic. And then, of course, once you're done with the mechanical side of the house, you can go for spring drive, which is a real sort of hybrid of quartz and mechanical watchmaking, and um, in a lot of ways represents sort of just a perfect marriage of those two technologies. And then you can do that all the way up to watches that cost six figures. So you can get that sort of watchmaking experience from $2,000 all the way up to $100,000 or a little bit more, where you're going to get all kinds of like craftsmanship and artisanal work in those watches. That's what I'm really sort of like talking about when I say that you could be a one brand collector with this company and never feel like you have to look outside. They make something like, I think, not even 50,000 watches a year. Just for reference,
Oh,
Rolex makes over 1.2 million. Last year they made over 1.2 million. Patek makes something like 72,000. Vacheron makes more. Longa makes something like 5,000, but then again, like the average Longa price point is like so much higher than Grand Seiko, they're not really comparable.
yeah.
Omega makes, I think, millions of watches. So does Cartier. No, actually, sorry. Omega makes about 500 to 550,000. Cartier makes a little bit more than that. Tissot makes quite a bit. So in terms of like how exclusive really is the watch that you're buying, and how likely is it that you will come across someone who is wearing the same thing?
Mm.
I mean, unless like you're a nerd like us who like just
Yeah.
hangs out in those circles where the
Yeah.
likelihood is much higher. If you're
Yeah.
just a normie who's buying a Grand Seiko watch, you genuinely have something that most people will not see otherwise than on your wrist. And then when they see it, they will just be blown away by how beautiful it is.
It,
And then doubly blown away by the fact that it is a Seiko watch. So, and that, you probably paid less for it than they might imagine. So for all of those reasons, but primarily for me, like this, the story always comes back to the technical innovation side.
mm.
Um, Grand Seiko is near and dear to my heart. I own quartz Grand Seikos, quartz Seikos. I own mechanical, hand wound, and automatic Grand Seikos. I do not own a manually wound Seiko, but I do have an automatic Seiko. I own a spring drive hand wound from Creedor. I have high beats, a couple of different high beats, one with the conventional lever escapement movement, one with the new 9SA5. But yeah, I mean, I love the brand.
Yeah.
It's where I started. I think like my real sort of like, let's not just like dip our toes in the collecting
Hmm.
world or the world of horology, but let's actually like try and dive in
Completely
and see
cannonballing it.
and see how the water feels. That was Grand Seiko for me, and I'm very happy now looking back that that's where I got my start.
I love it so much. I think it's going to resonate with a lot of listeners. Grand Seiko is one of those watches that if you know, you know. You see it on someone's wrist and you go, that did
Yep.
not happen by accident.
Yep.
There's so many different reasons why people buy watches, different
Hmm.
brands, different values, metals, finishing, all that. And we're not here to discuss, or judge like what's right or what's wrong. It's to each their own. You buy what you love, and hopefully you're happy with it. But a Grand Seiko on someone's wrist, to me at least, says watch nerd. I'm gonna have a good
Yeah.
time talking to this person like
Yes,
instantly.
absolutely.
You had mentioned a little bit about it, and I want to give you an opportunity to tell us a bit more about it. But as far as Grand Seiko is concerned, is there a grail on the horizon, or is there something heading your way that you'd like to share, maybe as a sneak peek to us, given that you have such an extensive Seiko and Grand Seiko and
Right.
Creedor?
Nothing on the horizon for the moment,
Hmm.
but as soon as I have the funds, there's a couple of heavy hitters that I want to get. One is the H2, which is the Creedor high-end spring drive movement precious metal watch.
Beauty. It's
I could
just
spend I could
stunning.
spend the next 45 minutes talking about it. I really don't want to, because it pains me at this point to do so.
Yeah.
They make 20 of those in each metal a year. That's all they produce. They're all made by hand. It's just spectacular watchmaking. And then the other one is the SLGH 002, which was the very first Evolution Series 9 watch that they ever made. It was a limited edition of 100 pieces in gold on a leather strap. So if you think about like the white birch as being
Hmm.
like the new face of Grand Seiko, the white birch was announced, or like the fact that like there would be something like the white birch was announced by the arrival of that watch. It was the first one with which they launched the 9SA5 movement.
And
Yeah,
what
that's
year was that?
2020.
2020.
So that's on my wish list.
Well, I'm rooting for you, and I hope it happens so that I can
Thank
see it
you.
in person. And I think there's so much knowledge and experience and passion and obvious love for the brand that you hold within your heart that I think we could have a follow-up podcast episode just talking about Grand Seiko.
Oh, absolutely.
Now, I do have
That's just another Friday for me.
absolutely, yeah. And let's figure out our schedules and let's make it happen. But for now, I'm sorry for this. I know you and I share a connection when it comes to Citizen watches as well. And with that said, not to incite a flurry of comments, but if push comes to shove, Hamza, Citizen or Seiko. I won't give you any more details. That's all I'll say. That's I'll
Seiko.
say
Seiko.
Seiko. Seiko. Okay.
Seiko. Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah. If
Respect.
it's if that's all you're giving me in the
That's all
question,
I'm giving you.
then
I can't
yeah,
give you any more.
then
Sorry.
then Seiko.
All right. All right. Respect. Let's shift gears a bit. Hamza, how would you describe watch charts? And I know you touched a little bit on it
Yeah.
in the beginning, but how did you actually start in the first place? And how do you fit in the grand scheme of watch charts as a whole? Because I know watch charts has been around for at least 3 years now, right?
Yeah. So the company was founded in 2019, so 5 years ago. And I forget if I'm employee number, it depends on like how you count, but I think
Mm,
I'm employee number 3 or number 4.
nice.
And we're still just a team of 5.
Okay.
And we're bootstrapped, so we don't have investors. And we've been profitable for certainly as long as like I've been at the company. And the mission of the company, because we do strive to be mission driven.
Mm,
We do want to be very deliberate about what it is we're trying to do with all of the time that we spend building the product and the service. The mission is to drive greater transparency into the secondary market.
hmm
That's
hmm
primarily for collectors because we are collectors and enthusiasts ourselves, all of us. And then also, of course, for brands and dealers and other stakeholders in the industry. The reason that we think price transparency is important is because we believe very strongly in the long run, it will result in a healthier market and happier customers. Um, and I think anybody who sort of cares about the long-term health and viability of the market um, should sort of want the same outcome. What we try to then do to achieve that mission is publish daily updated market prices currently for over 27,000 watches. Those are watch references, individual models. And we do that by collecting data from over 24 publicly available data sources, marketplace platforms, collector forums like Watch Exchange or on Reddit or Watch You Seek, Rolex forums, and so on. And we collect the trading activity that happens between collectors, and in some instances, dealers. We clean that up, aggregate it, and then push all of that data we collect through our proprietary pricing methodology, and then publish a daily updated market price for every single watch. And then that watch price can be modified for like specific scenarios. So if you want to see a dealer price, that's different from a private party transaction price. New condition, pre-owned condition, with box and papers, without box and papers, in North America, in Asia, or in Europe. These are all variables for which we can model a different price. And we've basically invested over the last several years now in building up the infrastructure to take in all of this data and then clean it up and then push it back out through the website so that buyers, collectors, sellers know how to price a given watch. So let's say you want to buy a pre-owned Panerai. I'm just randomly picking Panerai.
Yeah.
Right? Let's say you've been interested in the brand, you're not sure if you want one, but you still want to like spend some time wearing one and seeing what the ownership experience is like. And you have some idea of like, all right, well, I want a Radiomir. I don't want, one of the other ones. You go look at the retail price of a Radiomir today. It's whatever it is, like $7,000-8,000 in the US. And you're like, all right, I don't know that I want to commit that much money to this. Let me see if there's something cheaper available on the secondary market, wear it for a little while, see if this is just a bug that gets out of my system or if I genuinely enjoy wearing this watch. If I do, maybe at some point down the line, I'll shell out the actual full retail price for this watch. But in the meantime, I want to buy it. I want to wear it. I want to enjoy the experience. And then if at some point I feel like I'm ready to move on from it, I want to move on from it. Okay, I do some research. I realize that there are multiple Radiomir references. There's, let's say hundreds of active listings. How do I know what to pay? Right? That's really where we come in. And what we will say is come to the website, search for the watch you're looking for. We'll give you today's private party transaction price in pre-owned condition with box and papers. That's the headline number. If you want to see how much you should be expecting to pay if you're buying from a dealer instead, here's likely the additional premium that you would have to pay. Do you want to buy one? Well, here's a bunch of listings aggregated from eBay and all of the collector forums that we track. If you just want to use this as a starting point to go buy from someplace else where you're negotiating with a dealer, have at it, right? Our goal is to equip you with sufficient information to have you feel like you can act with confidence, whatever action it is that you decide to take. If it's buying, choice. Exactly. If you're buying, you should feel like you're buying with greater confidence. If you're selling, you should feel like you're selling with greater confidence and not leaving money on the table by not pricing higher. If you want to just see whether now is a good time or a bad time to buy or sell, we'll give you some indicators on the overall health of the market. And ultimately, you might say, okay, well, that all sounds well and good, but if you're a business, how are you making money? The way we're making money is primarily by basically having paid subscribers for unlimited access to the data on the website. So
I was going to say, what is the model? Like, what is the pricing model?
Yeah.
Like,
so it's kind of like if you go to the New York Times, there's a paywall. You'll get a certain number of articles for free every month. So if you're just curious about a given watch or a couple watches or whatever it is, there's a certain amount of traffic that you'll get before you hit the paywall on the website, at which point you can either wait until next month and then you'll get another sort of quota of free access, or you're welcome to sign up for one of two membership tiers. And what they will give you access to is additional historical data. And they will also give you access to additional analytical tools. So for example, if you want to see all of the watches from Patek that trade above retail, and you want to see their current market prices and the premiums at which they trade above retail, that's paywalled. The full list is paywalled, right? So there's a page on the website that you can go to and we'll show you like what the top, I think, 3 watches are for free. And then the rest of the list is, sits behind the paywall. So
Subscription
if you
based, yeah.
exactly. And the paid subscription is not necessarily a service for every watch enthusiast out there. I think you have to be somebody who is value driven in the way that they're buying and selling watches over
Hmm.
time.
Hmm.
The fact that they are buying and selling watches over time, so they're not just somebody who's like, oh, I'm going to buy 5 watches and then I'm done with my collection and then I don't want to buy any more watches, right? And I'm not going to sell any of the 5, so I don't
Yes,
really care
well,
about the market.
yes, but let's be real. Nobody ever,
But let's be real.
even if
Yes.
they do, I'm gonna stop at 5 watches. Okay, okay, happy with you.
Okay. Yeah.
Fair.
Exactly. Just wait till you see that date in white gold.
Hmm.
Yeah. So if you care about like tracking the market, or like your collecting is driven to a large degree by consuming this sort of information, then we provide the service that lets you sort of have that data at your fingertips, and you pay us for the privilege. And membership itself is available in 2 tiers. So there's the enthusiast level of membership, which gives you unlimited access to the website. There's the professional tier of access, which is sort of more geared towards if you're a dealer who is the thing with dealers is like they'll probably know how to like price reasonably well the top 200, top 300 watches that are being bought and sold on the market. But given the fact that we have 27,000 watches on the website, I think that tells you that the market has a very long tail.
Hmm.
So you get that Panerai Radiomir, right? And now you're like, okay, well, what do I pay for this? Or like, what do I charge for this?
Hmm.
You use our service. And if you're using that enough, then, of course, like paying for a subscription hopefully makes sense for you. So um, between those two, that's a majority of our revenue. And then because we have eBay links on the website, like we earn some affiliate revenue from that. We also have enterprise customers. So people who access the data not through the website,
Hmm.
but pay for access via API.
Hmm.
So that's, insurance companies, financial institutions, larger dealers who have, like sort of in-house tech teams and want to automate pricing or things like that. So hopefully, like what that's telling people as they listen to this is we're sort of in the watch industry as a company, but we're also sort of not,
Hmm.
because we don't buy watches, we don't
Hmm.
sell watches. We are not interested in getting into the business of buying and selling watches ourselves.
Hmm.
Um, we don't make watches, and we don't cover or write about watches the way people in the media normally do. It's like, oh my God, new Speedmaster. How cool is
Yeah,
this?
yeah.
Slightly different
There's
blue dial.
there's
Yay.
no
Right.
there's no conflict of interest here. It's you're
Yes.
providing a service and transparency. It's everything that
And that's yeah.
I was envisioning as you were saying, this is what we do. We provide data, we aggregate it, we redistribute it out. It's for my car nerds out there, especially in like North America. It's a Kelly Blue Book for watches.
Yeah.
You have your private party, you have your retail party, you have your dealer, new, used, CPO, all that stuff. It's essentially like a Kelly Blue Book of what you would normally use for your car while you're car shopping or trying to figure out what to price your car that you're trying to sell. It's the same thing, but for watches.
Yeah. And the reason that we do not get involved in those those commercial activities
Hmm.
is very like it's a very deliberate choice to not do that, because the way we're set up now, the business is purely software as a service.
Hmm.
So, the business model is that's how we earn revenue and that's how we make money. And the reputation of the business at this point is built on the assertion that you can trust us, um, because we have no vested interest in any particular watch selling at a particular price.
In that sense, you're a bit like Switzerland. Neutral.
Yes, you could say that. You could say that. But yes, we've sort of tried as hard as we can to I think retain that edge, because when the company started, I mean, Charles was literally just, it started as a spreadsheet, because Charles was just like me, like he was working in a tech job at IBM, had some money, wanted to buy and sell watches. And he was like, you know what? I don't want to have to pay retail price for a watch that I know I can get a discount on a secondary market. But then obviously not all discounts are the same.
Mm.
So, can I find, watches that are like value for money buys, which is the market discounts them, but if you try to assess their raw horological value, they're amazing watches to buy, right?
Mhm.
Like let's say, I mean, and that to some degree is, obviously a matter of
Subjective.
personal preference and
Right.
subjective and whatever. But let's say you want a duo face,
Yeah.
reverso, right? Or you want a Bulgari Octo Roma, not an Octo Finissimo, but an Octo Roma. Or you want something from Grand Seiko's back catalog,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
Um, like let's say you want the SBGA 011, which they no longer make, which is the double signed Seiko Grand Seiko dial, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, the movement is the same inside. The case is the same. The bracelet is the same. The only difference between what you would buy today and that is a different reference number and the fact that the old one also says Seiko on the dial,
Hmm.
which some enthusiasts actually preferred because they thought it was a more balanced dial aesthetically. So yeah, I mean, if you want to buy that, then yeah, going secondary makes sense. And if we're telling you what the price of that watch is, you should feel reassured that like there's nothing in it for us, other than like if you're paying us for a subscription, that we would tell you the price of that watch is $3,500 and
Yeah.
not like 3,750 or like 3,900 because like secretly we're like we're
Yeah.
making some money if you buy it from somebody at 3,900.
Well, essentially, it's like if you go to Google and you search anything, you'll have like the sponsored
Yeah,
top three, top five search results that'll pop up. Or if you go to Amazon and you put in, I don't know, dish soap dispenser, you'll have like 5 to 10 sponsored results that are gonna populate at the top. What you're saying is Watch Charts is not that. There is no inherent desire or drive from Watch Charts to indicate a specific price in a specific region because you'll get a kickback or some kind of monetary benefit in return for
correct.
this service. Your service is pure and again, Switzerland in nature, in that it is neutral, in that we collect data, we aggregate it, we clean it up, and then we provide it to you as a service so that you can feel informed as to whether the price that you're hoping to get for the watch that you're trying to sell or the price that you're willing to pay for the watch that you're trying to buy. It's not the highs and it's not the lows. Just
Yeah,
educating yourself and informing your choice and your decision as
yeah,
to
and
condition and papers and boxes and year
yeah,
and
and obviously, like I'm talking in highly general terms because we're
sure.
we're just having a high level conversation. But
Yeah.
to anyone who's interested in learning more about how we do this, like we publish some information on the website about our methodology. There's nuances to each of these numbers that I have variously referred to. So we try to demystify why one number may look different from another. And then, yeah, we make that information available on the website. So for anyone interested in learning more about that, I would invite you to go check out the website.
Tell me, Mr. Watch Charts, what trends or shifts in the watch market have you noticed? I don't want to say recently, but like as a whole, we can kind of look at 2024 and say as a whole, there's been
Yeah,
a dip, right? But what trends have you noticed personally? Maybe some of it is, anecdotal stuff, but
right.
you do have the keys to the proverbial kingdom as far as like data is concerned.
To some degree. I mean, we focus on the secondary market,
Yeah.
on generally on modern pre-owned watches. Let me throw another question back at you first, which is, this is something that I've certainly been guilty of in this discussion, but also like given what I do for work, I almost can't help but be guilty of it often. Um, but I do think it's something worth pointing out, which is that we've been talking about watches in a sort of financialized sense. So we're
Mhm.
talking about them in terms of their value, in terms of their market prices, in terms of whether they're good value for money at whatever price you're buying them, and so on and so forth. And that is just one aspect of being into watches or even when you're deciding whether or not to spend money on them, right? So
Mhm.
sure, like you can be spending money and you have to be aware of the fact that you are spending money, but um, there's lots of other factors that can impact that decision. So the question for you really is, are you asking me to try and answer the question of like what's happened in the last year in watches in terms of trends, specifically in terms of how the market has behaved, or more in terms of like where I think the gravity of the where the center of gravity of the conversation around watches has gone, or what seems to be on trend? Because I think those are like three different ways of answering the question, and I'm not sure if like you were referring to one or the other or the third.
No, totally fair. It was more of trends that were noticed in 2024. But as I kept listening to you, it also would interest me what the general health of the secondary watch market was for
Right.
2024.
Right. So let me answer that, and then I'll move on to the other two.
Yes,
I
yes.
think so we publish in collaboration, or have for the last 2 years published in collaboration with Morgan Stanley, a report every financial quarter that summarizes what we've seen in terms of market trends and price movement. So we'll talk about value retention, we'll talk about changes in current production catalog, retail price changes, the rollout of the Rolex CPO program and the size of that and the scale of that, because that's another market that we're tracking the rollout of very closely. We'll report sort of overall as a brand, is Rolex up or down? Like
Hmm.
it in some degree, in some ways, it's like it's a very unfair question to ask, because I think it means different things to different people. But
Hmm. Hmm.
we've tried to standardize it by saying, like, again, this is on the website if anybody wants to check it out, but we um, have defined a methodology by which we will come up with brand indexes and then publish the value of those indexes historically, so you can see how the trend has shifted over time.
Hmm.
And then you can use that as a proxy for saying, okay, well, this is what's going on in the market. And then there's like sort of secondary indicators around just the base index, that you can also look at, such as average age of inventory, that's currently available on the market, how much of that inventory is available, so what is total supply, and then lastly, the absorption rate, which is like how frequently does that inventory turn over and how long, like in a given period of time.
Hmm.
So that's sort of like the approach that we take to assessing and writing about market health. And 2024 has been a continuation of a trend that started in the spring of 2022. So most of 22, all of 23, and then 24 as well have basically been one unchanged story of decline in prices across the board for the biggest brands. So Rolex, Patek, AP have all seen market prices for their most popular watches decline. In 2024, I think the pace of that decline has slowed relative to 2023. But I think even just the Rolex index, for example, is down something like 5%. And that's just the 30 most popular watches. If you take the brand as a whole, of course, that number might look even worse. So I think the market as a whole is not in a the secondary market as a whole is not in a super healthy place. Um, but I think you have to specify in that statement healthy for whom,
Yeah.
right? It is not great for people like you and me who already own a bunch of watches to see that chart trending down every month, telling us, or reminding us rather, of the futility of the choices that we made in hope about, oh no, no, this is just where we're just parking some money, we're parking some
Hmm.
cash. We'll be able to get it out when we want. Yes, yes, yes. This Grand Seiko will indeed give me back 95 cents on the dollar, right? Um, and
Some
that
people do that.
some people, yeah,
Yeah.
and inevitably, that clashes with reality. And when you then do decide to go out and try and sell something in the market, you find out, okay, well, the market is not in a great place, so this is not a great time to try and be selling. If you're a dealer, I think just the fact that prices have been declining over the last 2.5 years have resulted in very challenging times to be in the industry in that role. So we've seen in Europe, for example, Cronext, which was one of the larger dealers from Germany, enter bankruptcy proceedings and then eventually be acquired by another firm. In the US, Crown and Caliber, most famously, sort of shut down and got sold, or the rights to the name got sold to a European watch company. Um, Hodinkee shut down its pre-owned business and then was acquired by Watches of Switzerland. Chrono 24 has seemingly been on the cusp of an IPO for some time now, but that has not happened yet. Um, so there's all of these things that I think for dealers have meant that it's not been a great time. But and I was having a conversation with someone else about this recently. I feel like if by luck or fortuitousness now was the time that you were getting into watches, my goodness, I don't know that there's been a better time to get into watches now than at any time in the last 4 to 5 years.
Mm-hmm.
Because imagine the 2 years of frothiness leading up to the market peaking, right? Like every month you'd be like, oh my God, I paid like $25,000 for a Daytona and I feel like I paid so much money. And the next month you find out it's like 26,000. And then like 6 months later, you find out it's worth 28,000, right? And you're like, yeah, excellent choices, right? And then it peaks for the 116500 in February or March 22 at I think over $50,000. So you're probably feeling
I
great about
saw
yourself at that point.
I saw 48. I
Yep.
wouldn't be surprised if it hit 50.
You would be feeling great about yourself. And then
100%.
now I think that watch is less than 25, right? So in that sense, like right now is a great time to be getting into watches.
Thank
Because prices are the lowest they have been in the last 5 years. But at the same time, if we go back to an assessment of market health, there is no sign of a bottom. So we don't know if prices have bottomed out. So you could buy something today and maybe still lose money on it until the market, sort of either stabilizes or prices start appreciating again. So I think 2024 overall on the secondary market analysis side, from a financial perspective, depending on who you are, has been a different picture. Um, I think in terms of where the center of gravity for discussion has been around, I think it's been around the state of the watch media. I think it's been around how brands interact with and connect with their audiences. I think micro brands, certainly and other independent brands have shown that there is much that they do because they are so much nimbler that bigger brands could learn from.
hmm
I think for bigger brands, it's more just been about retrenchment. So there's no new, crazy model launches. There's no new crazy technological innovations. It's by and large been as a whole, taken as a whole, of course, in my opinion, more iterative than anything else. I mean, I think like Paddock's biggest headline of the year has been the Cubitus, which is, I mean, we can talk about it, but like, in a lot of ways is derivative of something that came before, or certainly leans on a lot of design elements that are not new. So in that sense, that, or like if you look at what Rolex released, they released, I believe, the Batman, sorry, not the Batman, the Bruce Wayne GMT Master,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
Um,
A
which is
bunch of
just a
mother
new,
of pearl dials.
yeah, and probably something crazy like I can't remember if it was this year or last year, but the day dates with the emojis on the date and day discs, that was last year.
That was last year. Yep.
Yeah. So yeah, I think it's more been around things other than the product itself,
hmm
than the product actually, because I don't know that there was really anything amazing to say about the product. And then in terms of trends, I think um, the march towards smaller case sizes is continuing. That doesn't seem to be letting up anytime soon. Um, Everybody's always saying that vintage is making a comeback.
hmm
Uh, but it's not that vintage itself is making a comeback. It's like there are specific things within vintage that rise and fall in popularity. Um,
I think
so yeah, there's micro trends like that, but nothing really that stands out otherwise, I would say.
there's something interesting there, and I think it's a topic for another episode. But I think with a massive influx of watch enthusiasts coming in 2020, there's a journey. There's a certain amount of mileage, and with that comes experience. And I don't know what percentage of what I'm about to say is accurate, maybe none, but we are about to hit 5 years since the pandemic. And 5 years is a pretty decent amount of time to be in a hobby. I'm curious how much of the quote unquote, um, vintage is coming backness is associated with, well, you now have enthusiasts that have been in the hobby for at least 4 years, if not five, that have
Hmm.
now potentially, uh, purchased their quote unquote grail pieces, the brand new watches that they saw, fell in love with, and purchased. And now they're like, well, what else is out there? Whether it's,
Yep.
independents or micro brands or vintage market,
Vintage. Yep.
you know. Um, I think it's a topic we can explore in the future, but I'm curious because there's these, cycles, right?
I
People
think we're all,
enter.
yeah, I think we're all drawn to watches for different reasons. And then once we're in, any number of external factors that we may not even be aware of at the time pull us in different directions.
Mm, mhm,
So maybe you first got into watches because you liked a Tudor Black Bay.
mhm,
And then all of a sudden, you really, for some inexplicable reason, got into, I don't know, like Cartier tanks, right?
mhm,
And like you were all about Cartier tanks for like a couple of years. And then all of a sudden, like you're into Speedmasters. And then you're done with Speedmasters in 3 months and you're like, no, 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 this isn't really like for me, right? Um, and you may find yourself sort of like over time, jumping between these things. I think that's probably true for most people. Um, and I think what I would tell collectors really is um, try and understand why you're on the journey you're on. Why is it that you find yourself interested in whatever it is that looks interesting now? Is it because it just happens to be the flavor of the week?
mhm,
Is it because it's speaking to something deeper inside you that genuinely interests you and keeps you engaged? And you're just like not realizing it or paying attention to it
mhm.
and really nurturing it at that point. Did you buy that Panerai because everybody in your collector group has one and you start to feel left out? And then all of a sudden you're like, all right, well, I have this Panerai and I moved away, and then now, like in this new city that I live in, nobody has a Panerai, and like, what do I do with this hunk of steel, right? And
Yeah.
there's all of these things because obviously, like, it's all happening against the backdrop of life as well. Things happen in everybody's lives.
Mhm,
Um, Collecting is a journey. I think if you speak to somebody who's a year in versus 2 years in versus 5 years versus 10 versus 15 versus 30, everybody's going to have a different experience, is going to be pulled into watchmaking and watches again and again and again and again for at times entirely brand new reasons.
mhm,
I find myself coming back to like questioning why something interests me because I don't want to feel like I'm operating purely on the basis of like lizard brain thinking. It's
mhm,
like, oh my
mhm.
God, shiny object, me likey, me has money, me buy, right?
Yeah.
Like, and there is, I mean, that's enjoyable in its own way,
It's got
but
its joys. Yeah. Yeah.
it's yes, but I don't know how many people really have the budget to do that for 5 years,
Uh,
right?
completely.
Maybe you do that with your first Rolex, your first Breitling, your first Tudor, your first Grand Seiko, your first Cartier, but can you do it for the next 10,
I
right?
can't.
Yeah, and then all of a sudden, like one day you wake up and you have 10 watches in
Yeah.
your watch box, right? Like, which one are you going to wear? Why do you even have those 10, right?
But
So
you and I
those are the
both
questions
know
that,
it's much easier said than done, though. I mean, it's
yes,
so much easier said
absolutely.
than it. I did a whole video. Nomo sent me the Tangente date, and I didn't want to like the
Send it
videos that I
back.
make there.
Yeah.
I didn't want to send it back. Um, the title that I was feeling for that video was Beyond the Hype, and I
Hmm.
started asking myself like when I like something, why is it that I like it? What attracts me to it? Is it that, the circle of friends that I have near me are really into it and I am also like jumping on that train, that hype train and going, yeah, me too. I also like it. Or is it, other influences from within the media? Is it Instagram? Is it YouTube? Is it the value that I see on some of the pieces of what they MSRP'd for, what they retailed for, and what they're, what the secondary
Yep.
market is
Yep.
is dictating that people are willing to pay for them. Like, is that part of it? And rarely is it just one or two ingredients, but more often than not, it's a multitude of
Yep.
influences that kind of like stack and combine and Voltron into like this weird, like, I think I really like this thing.
My favorite example of that from my collection is the Chanel J12 that I own,
Hmm.
which is just
Is
like,
this the ceramic one?
yep, right. And it is, in my opinion, severely undervalued for what it is.
Hmm.
I think I paid like 2,100, 2,200 bucks for mine. It's a watch that retails at like seven and a half, eight, something like that. Fully functional diver, unidirectional bezel, lume dial, screwed on crown, 200 meters of water resistance. Like, functionally, if you just write out the specs,
Yeah.
it's identical to a Tudor.
Yeah.
And then when you look at it, you're like, what? This thing, this can do what my Black Bay can do, right? And
Wild.
I just love that sort of like contrast, that almost like oxymoronic quality of the watch, right?
Yeah.
And
The
that's why I have it like,
juxtaposition, the crazy wildness of like, oh, that's cool. You have a Black Bay 58. That's cool. I've got this. Do you want to compare specs? And
yeah,
initial at first blush, you're like, what are you talking about? What like, oh, actually, let
yeah,
me explain.
yeah. And I mean, I'm crazy. I have a Black Bay 58 too. So it's not like I haven't like, I'm just being contrarian for the sake of being contrarian, but
Yeah.
yeah, and there's exactly to your point. Like there were so many things that went into that experience. The specific reference that I bought, the only reason I knew about it is because somebody had one at a meetup, and I just could not stop thinking about it. And I was like, all right, well, I guess I'm doing it. And I went and found one online and paid for it. And I'm very happy with it.
Well, congrats. Honestly, it's a beautiful piece and
Yeah.
very different. And so I completely understand. It's part of the reason why I feel like the Black Bay 58 925, the silver case Tudor,
Yeah. Yep.
um, with a taupe dial and aluminum bezel is just such a sleeper. It's gone
Yes.
under the radar, and I think obviously people like the Black Bay 58. But this isn't the one that most people bring up when they talk about the Black
When
Bay
they talk about the
58.
Black Bay 58. Yep.
But
It's almost always the black one or the blue one.
right. But the moment I saw the silver case and the taupe dial, I'm like, I'm sorry, yeah, it's a silver case. That's it, yeah. Oh, it's a 925 like actual silver precious metal case. And then just kind of trying to compare or figure out what other watch do I know of without having to dive deep into research that has a silver case. And I didn't know. And so it instantly, it's like the weird one that I find so cool. And I know that there's fans out there. I know there are, but
For
I don't know.
anyone who really wants a silver case but is looking for an alternative, I would
Hmm.
suggest looking at James Lamb.
Oh yeah.
He hand makes his cases from silver.
Well, no, thank you for that. And I'll have to do
Good
some
luck.
research later. Every time I talk to you, not good things happen. Every time. Every time. I
Uh,
went when you gave me the Citizen, I just went down a rabbit hole and I was like, I think I want no, wait, well, and then I started asking
did
the
I
question, why
did
do
I
I
tell you
want
about
this?
the did I tell you about the JDM versions of that watch?
No, you have not, and you won't, because I
They
won't let
have
you.
rice paper like dials.
Oh no. No, we're not talking about that right now. I can't. I
Okay.
can't. That concludes this episode of the Timist Podcast Series. A sincere thank you for hanging out with us. Hopefully you enjoyed it. If you did, then please push all the buttons that will help you hear more of us in the future. If you'd like to continue the conversation, you can either drop a comment on the associated YouTube video or reach out to me on Instagram at TheTimistIG. Stay tuned for part 2. Thanks for listening. I'm the Timist. Be well, and I'll catch you in the next one.